name is Craig Maki, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer with Provisio. And I am happy to have with me Chris Martinez. Can you tell us who you are and where you work? And you guys work your way around the horn so everybody knows who they're talking to today.
Sure. Thanks, Craig, and thanks for hosting us. My name is Chris Martinez. I am the Chief Administrator and Strategy Officer with the Resurrection Project here in Chicago.
My name is Heath Parks. I am the Information Manager and Manager of Salesforce at Cincinnati Works, and our goal is to eliminate poverty in our community.
I'm Chris Shue. I serve as the co-CEO of Trellus here in Chicago. Trellus, we're proud to be an organization dedicated to providing opportunities for our immigrant and refugee communities.
Thank you very much for being here. And the three of you are the folks who are often not in the rooms when we're having the other conversations around how cool this innovation journey is going to be and implementing technology. And there's always that question that's looming like the big elephant in the room. Who's going to pay for this? And how are we going to pay for this? Everybody's wonderful at ideating about how we are going to create impact and measure it better and all that other good stuff. But writing the check is a different story. And the premise for today is to really talk about not so much what's the silver bullet, because there isn't one, to affording and transitioning into technology and embracing these sorts of things, rather than it's a global strategy that involves lots of different things. Really a matter of doing a good survey of what's available to you in your community and within your organization. And that's hopefully where we'll get today. Big picture, Chris, that means we're starting with you can you tell us how, Chris Martinez, how you went about engaging in the conversations with foundations and other capacity grant related potential funders in that conversation of the chicken and the egg of I need the stuff to tell the story that you want me to fund, and how do you even go about broaching that, and where do you find those people?
Yeah, it's a great question. And even though it may not seem like organizations have technology or good technology in the digital world that we are operating in today, most organizations and even nonprofits of all shapes and sizes and stages of maturity do have things like spreadsheets, Google Docs or Drives, online file sharing tools, sign up lists, surveys, mailing lists that is mostly technology driven, enabled, and being utilized. But the issue is, despite kind of the widespread use of these tools that most every nonprofit is using today, the data is siloed, right? It's difficult to mine for actionable insights and much less try to tell a story of impact with all those connected pieces of information. So I don't really see it as a chicken and egg paradox, but an issue of changing the narrative that has really historically viewed technology as overhead and data or impact reporting as kind of administrative functions or indirect costs. Because the fact is, these are integral to program and service delivery, and even more so as we navigate an increasingly knowledge based economy where human and social capital drives kind of network effects and the multiplier effect that most everyone is really seeking in terms of broader impact. So perhaps the silver lining to all of this is that due to the pandemic response, there was an unprecedented and largely successful adaptation of service delivery, leveraging technology and data because we had to, right? So there's a lot of recent success stories that we should be highlighting and really amplifying out there. I think in terms of newer, and I put air quotes around that, integrated technology and systems of engagement particularly enable programs to increase reach, accessibility, capacity, consistency of service delivery while breaking down those information silos and gaps. And there are many studies that have confirmed that that kind of technology is not just instrumental, but vital to data-driven solutions and better decision-making.
Thank you, Chris. And a great segue To the other Chris, can you tell us a little bit about how you evaluate with you and your staff new opportunities as they come to you to make sure that the technology aspect of it is being supported in those applications?
Sure can. Thanks, Craig. And it's a pleasure to be here. We heard mindset referenced several times, and I think this is really important from your CFO's mindset. And as we approach budgets, people put their guards up, and we have to remember that a budget is just a vehicle to tell your story. And it needs to be congruent with how you're administering your programs, how you're engaging at the front side of those grant proposals and applications. And your budget is just the backside of that, of like, how are you going to do it? So the mindset cannot be underscored enough that seeing technology as integral in service delivery informs your approach to these things. And so one of the things we do is at the start of vetting or qualifying grant opportunities, we set forth what is our platform. This platform transformation of service delivery is imperative. That our platform is built not only on our direct service, meaning our staff, but our platform is built on our digital infrastructure that allows us to meet people where they are, whether that's in Westridge or they're traveling across the world, where we can make sure that we are able to engage and meet the needs of our communities wherever they are. And that is a really important approach as we think about grant applications and resourcing technology. In our organization, when we're talking about new grants, the first lines, and these are not indirect costs, these are direct programmatic expenses because they are vital in administering the programs. And I think when we are able to approach it that way, and we start with the front side of the funder, we write the narratives, we speak about our platform. Number two, when we do the budget's congruent with that. And then on the follow-up, when we do our impact reporting, we're able to show how these investments in the infrastructure yield the results that we're claiming they will yield from an efficacy perspective. It's a snowballing effect. You actually find yourself able to ask for increases and further this sort of resource. And I don't want to take anything from Heath, but I think one of those pieces that we really try and do on the front side is make the case for a technology because it's not a one-time cost. And to the extent we're able to do that, it's very effective.
And yes, Heath, that does lead right in there. So nice setup. How do you go about conceptualizing that on an annual basis in working through that evaluation to keep the wheels on the bus, as they say, year over year with this technology?
Yeah, I don't want to keep referring back to something we said or other individuals said too, but it really is a shifting mindset. It cannot be stressed enough because you just have to be looking at these things in a totally different way than even 5, 10 years ago. The landscape has shifted so much, and it's so vital to be able to do that. I definitely think making sure that you're looking at it as a value add instead of a line cost item helps with that stuff. And something else that Chris said is being able to talk about how technology is also helping you drive the mission. We're not really good at that. At least not a lot of nonprofits are really good about saying that. It's almost taboo. Like we can only tell feel good stories about the people we serve. We can't tell them that the reason why we're actually able to tell this feel good story is that we had infrastructure and we have this robust thing to be able to do that. It's like the worst kept secret in the nonprofit world in that regard. And really, it is just being able to just think through. You have to have a long lens whenever you're looking at this stuff. And I think a lot of that is too is that if you're not like if people like me, like whether a full blown IT person, whether you have a CTO or just someone like me who's the liaison and the admin who's doing all this stuff, you have to be vocal and be able to be part of the conversations. You have to keep reminding them we need to be there early in the conversations to make sure that we're thinking about things the way that we need to be thinking about that. Because understanding that it is not just a one time cost. Like Chris mentioned, the subscription model, whether we like it or not, that is the reality of the place we're in. Just as something as simple as like something that we're going through the process is because we just never really thought about it is understanding what actually the FTE cost is for an individual. It's not just their salary and benefits. It's how many licenses do they need, and it's not just a one-time license. It's a recurring license. How many licenses they need? How many laptops they're going to need? All those other kind of stuff. Are they going to need a mobile phone? All this stuff. Everything is an app now, and everything is moving to a subscription-based model. And so many of the opportunities still treated as a one-time expense, where it is currently not a one-time expense. So really, it's just always having that being in the forefront and having those conversations and letting everyone know whatever the budget is, whatever you get for that particular subscription model, know that it's probably going to increase next year, and then the year after that, and then the year after that. And how do you think through that? So you really have to start thinking from your budget perspective much earlier in the process. I know that we do that, but be more strategic and intentional about, I need to look at this budget 3 years from now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, and what is that expected growth opportunity?
Chris, when you were first talking about rethinking grants and funding and telling stories and where the data is and siloed, do you have any tips or tricks on how you facilitate that conversation with potential funders? Um, because I can be the sarcastic one to say sometimes our funders say one thing and their grant applications look completely different with regards to what and how we can do things. So, how do you approach those conversations to meet the needs that you were speaking about earlier?
No, it's a great question. There are funders that, you know, traditionally or specifically will only fund programs. And a lot of what we're talking about is considered overhead or indirect cost. But fortunately, there are a number of funders and grants specifically investing in and that understand the importance of capacity building. So I can point to a number and a growing number of family foundations, community foundations, even impact investors that provide operating support and capacity building grants. So a few Chicago examples are the Community Memorial Foundation's Building Organizational Effectiveness Initiative, the Oak Park River Forest Community Foundation's Impact Excellence Program, and up until recently, the Pierce Family Foundation. Nationally, everyone's heard of Mackenzie Scott's Yield Giving Open Call, and many of us have benefited from that, fortunately and thankfully. And MacArthur Foundation's Lever for Change challenges have also, I think, increased awareness and reinforced the value of unrestricted funding to support and scale services. But it's interesting because I was preparing for our conversation today, ran across a recent survey by the Nonprofit Finance Fund that found 80% of nonprofits saw increasing demands for services, to Heath's point earlier about us scaling and adapting. Yet only 57% would be able to meet those demands. My experience has been, fortunately, the more transparent we are about the challenge of operating at what's the historical average of de minimis 10 to 15% indirect cost rate or overhead funding rate, when most profits, according to the Bridgespan Group, require at least 20% for effective program delivery, based on a 2019 paper that they published and is widely referenced out there that examined the problem of insufficient cost recovery. But the more clearly we highlight the need and true or appropriate cost, to both Heath and Chris's points earlier, of technology that not only supports but enables and scales programs and services, the more willing funders are really willing to collaborate on creative solutions, is what I've found. So in short, I think we need to really be more forthcoming and even somewhat more bold, courageous about advocating for and adopting a pay what it takes approach to philanthropy, and really specifying line by line again what the costs are, not just now, but how they're going to, and we anticipate they're going to grow as we grow our service delivery.
So good. Thank you for sharing. Reminds me of Grandpa always used to say, you don't get what you don't ask for. And sometimes I think it's a matter of being able to take some bold steps and just say, hey, I like your idea, but this is what will really help us. And going ahead and taking that. In full transparency, Mr. Shue and I used to work together, and one of the things that I most appreciated about working with him, because he was a certified public accountant, he was so skilled and adept at knowing what the rules were and where they were at. But the part that I appreciated greatly was Chris's ability to see the gray area between what was and how things were and what we needed them to be. And so, Mr. Shue, can you tell us a little bit about how you live in that accounting gray area and work as a CFO inside of an agency? Looking back at that time, we had 60 plus grants that some of them had been around for 20 years with the rules that have never changed. And we still had to figure out how to do the work. With technology, those grants had never contemplated being in existence. In any tips or tricks you have for folks in the same situation of we can't get rid of those things, we can't stop doing those grants, we need to figure out what to do with them and how to live in the world we are now situated in.
Thanks, Craig. The short answer is to live in the gray as an accountant, find some non-accountants who will go there with you, because accountants like it black and white. And so I think in the run-up to that, I just want to park on one piece though, Craig. In your role with Trellus then, you have to have support of your leadership. And you have to have a conviction that it's not about being in the gray because we want to bend the rules. It's about being in the gray because we care about our communities. We understand our programs. We understand what our theory of change is, what we're seeking to do. And we believe that if the rules aren't clear, we are going to make our case. And that is our job. That's our mandate as finance professionals. And so I think the first answer to that is your CFO needs to be lockstep with your leaders, with your leadership team. You say, what is if your department directors and leaders cannot articulate a theory of change to you, make them. If they're not familiar with logic models, make them. And the reason is when you're asking a finance professional to wade into a sort of a gray area of the CFR, of the federal sort of regulations of what's allowable under a grant, we need to do that with the sort of the fidelity of the program model. And when we do that, we're able to generally make a pretty compelling case that these aren't in fact indirect costs that we're trying to pass through to grants. These are not in fact an aggressive tactic to increase our reimbursement rate or any of those things, because no one wants to be in that area, right? Let's be clear. Everyone wants to do and honor the spirit of what our funders ask for and what the requirements of the grant are. But the reality of it is it's not that clear. And what has to be really clear is what we're seeking to do. And if that's clear and you have buy-in from your leadership, you'll have all the sort of inertia you need to tell your CFO, do it. I don't want to hear no. I want you to go figure out a way and make it happen. And I know that can create a little bit of a rub with the executive team and your sort of finance team, but I think you have to have that same level of boldness and courage that Chris talked about as approaching funders. You have to have that same conviction and same boldness and courage to push your team.
Thank you, Chris. Heath, how do you take your technology from that legacy mindset into this new world where I think about the days of when I started in nonprofit technology and excitement was the time the board member said, we're upgrading the computers at work. Would you guys like them? Along with the file cabinets and the other stuff we no longer need. And we were overjoyed with the idea that we were going to have those. I think I was 13, 14 years into my social working career before I ever saw a laptop. And I think many folks are still in that world on legacy devices, in servers, in closets, and nobody does that anymore, and things are in the cloud. How do you go about making that transition with the recognition that technology and replacing it is not cool, fun, fancy, fun to talk about, but incredibly necessary? to do, and how do you do that?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think part of it is I think we have to again. I shifting mindset is that a lot of nonprofits we work in the our goals is eliminating poverty, but I think sometimes nonprofits work like Chris mentioned, the starvation or poverty mindset. Like good and third or fourth downs are good enough, right? But ultimately, what we're doing is actually doing a great disservice to the people that we're serving. We're telling them that you're not even worth good secondhand. You maybe get second or third, and that's a terrible thing for us to be able to say to that. And so that's really a lot of where I look at it is that we are delivering best in class solutions. That is our goal. And for us to be able to do that, I need best in class stuff. I can't do that with a laptop that's 5 years old that won't run any of the things that I needed to run. We can't keep technology and laptops till literally they die and there's nothing left of them. You have to set a regular cycle of when you want to replace this and understanding whether it's desktops or whether it's laptops, whatever it is. We made a decision a few years ago that I would no longer get the bare bones of anything that when we were doing it. I didn't super spec everything out, but I did enough forethought to know that what is good enough today or what is good today is not going to be good a year from now because of just how technology runs. So getting that little bit of extra RAM, getting that little bit of extra whatever that may be to make sure that you're doing it and keeping that in the forefront because in the end you're going to lower your costs and you're going to reduce user frustration as you got to continue to add these things into that. Hardware is one of the easiest ones to take a look at, but you also just have to understand where the shifting dynamics is and where you're at in the organization.
Thank you. All right, fun round here. This is awesome stuff. We want to do this. We want to go on this digital journey. How do I know what the ROI is? It's usually from the IT director or the finance person in the room that's trying to think through how they're going to measure this, which generally looks something like if I save 30 minutes of this social worker and they make this much money per hour, we save hypothetically $5,000 over the year. The clinical people are looking at that going, not a great analogy. Not at all how it's going to work, not how our lives work. And their ROI is looking at and saying, I'm now able to prioritize the services that I need to deliver this family in a way differently than I ever could because I can see the entirety of the family versus the little silo, and I'm better at what I do. Measure that. What's the ROI of that? Curious what you all think about that when you're asked that question and or you got to defend that question inside of your own organizations around why you're recommending what you are.
It's a good question. I can say that we just recently I did this exercise because we just recently added this year a couple of things that actually make my life a little bit easier. And I had to do an ROI on it. It was I did the because I came from the for-profit world. I've been in the nonprofit space here since 2015, but I came from a large financial institution for 13 plus years, so I'm very ingrained in ROIs and KPIs and all the other kind of stuff. And you did the traditional thing, but I didn't just focus on saving this much time and here's what it would cost me to do X if I have to keep doing it. And here's the tool and what this is going to save, whatever. I also created narratives and stories around how it has a trickle down effect to other people in that regard. And you allow that to talk to those different audiences, I think. A lot of times when we're talking about investing in a technology, I try very hard to personalize it to the people from the front of the staff, not from you're saving money because people naturally figure if you're saving money because of X, that means either I'm going to be expected to do more or I'm in fear of maybe no longer having a job or something like that. And how I've always tried to frame it and how I continue to frame it is that this is reducing I don't want to say the BS things because they're not necessarily BS, but those things that allowing automation to handle certain kind of things and having tools to be able to do that frees you up to actually do that legitimate work that you need to be able to do with that client. It gives you time to be able to sit there in front of them to be able to help tell that robust story that we need to be able to tell to be able to help for the funders. And so it's really making it personal to them as much as you possibly can is what we've tried to do.
I'm going to take off my CFO hat. I've been asked that question a lot of times. And in all transparency, I think sometimes my response is frustrated. A lot of times the boards who are asking it, because I generally practice the let's ask a question first before I try to answer it, which is, what are you actually seeking to understand? And I think that question is quite nebulous for a lot of folks in this context. And what I found they're really asking is, hey, Chris, help me understand that this investment in technology is not punitive to programs. Or said differently, it is not taking money that would otherwise go to fulfill a programmatic cause. And help me understand that. Because that's more oftentimes than not is where that question is coming from, is not from a we don't understand the value of technology or we don't see it. And that's a whole different conversation if that's the question. But I found it first to say, really, what are you asking? And I can better discuss ROI when I really understand, are you purely asking a financial question? Because I can show you that, but oftentimes that's not it. It's how do we understand that there's stewardship of our mission? And how do we ensure that these investments aren't in any way, either in the short term or the long term, um, compressing that in a way that we wouldn't agree to? And I think that is where being really clear of all the things Chris and he's already alluded to, of understanding the stakeholders and how do you show the value in terms of their various piece in that process, what it looks like.
All right, here's a fun one for you. Fast forward in the future, 10 minutes after we end this, when you think to yourself, damn, I wish I would have said that. Here's your chance.
So I'll start really something that resonated with me. I wanted to really comment on and amplify is what Chris mentioned about our budgets. And this is something that I learned from and really respect from executive director I worked very closely with, who said, our budgets are a concrete and a true reflection of our values and what we value. So, in terms of not just what we're putting together internally, but what we're presenting to the outside world and to funders, we need to be much more intentional and truly reflect and be, again, as passionate about the direct mission, about the need for enabling technology and the tools to tell the stories without, again, providing additional hurdles to our service teams and volunteers and partners that are already doing so much, as a true reflection of our values and what we value. So.
I will say this: I recently learned a phrase, and I was particularly struck with just the conviction that comes through in everyone talking here. It's a Farsi phrase. I won't bother you by trying to say it in Farsi, but the gist of the phrase is not everyone who walks with you will reach your destination. It really underscoring there's a difference between walking and traveling. And I think when we phrase this context of a sustainable roadmap or how do we leverage technology, I think it's important to understand that you need colleagues and you need partners that are going to travel with you because it can be bumpy, it can be hard, but having a bought in leadership team and partners and service providers that are interested in your destination, not just the journey, will make it a fruitful process and will bring forward the change that we're all seeking to effect.
I would say it's been a great conversation, and the biggest thing is that I keep coming back to this. I just believe we have an ethical and moral responsibility to do it and to have these conversations, to go to this uncomfortable place that we need to be able to do it. Because if governments and other stuff are going to be able to fix some of these things that we're dealing with, it would have done, if money alone would have been the problem, it would have done fixed a lot of these solutions. And so I think that it's corny perhaps, but I think we have to be the change that we want to see happen out in the world. But I do think we have to look at it. I take a lot of this personally. It's personal to me. I don't take it personally. There's a difference. It's personal to me because I've lived some of this stuff. I've been the butt of the negative things that are there. So it is very personal to me. And I'm only here today because people were willing to stand in the gap. And I think that we don't often think enough about that ethical and moral responsibility that we have to be able to do this well. And we have to stop thinking about good enough. I don't mean that in a negative way, but that's really where I think it drives me. It's one of the things that I feel is imperative. And I think if we do that, I know we can make change because the history of the world has shown us there's negatives, this ebb and flow, but the history of the world has also shown us when people come together for a common thing and they do it from an ethical and moral standpoint, the things that we can accomplish is outstanding. There's no limit. It truly is making possible the impossible.
So cool. And I got to tell you, the social worker in the group of y'all, I'm supposed to be the one talking about this change and empowering it. I think it is such a cool place that we have gotten to that if it was money alone, we would have solved this problem. If it was simply having for profit consultants provide their wisdom to the nonprofits to become better and more efficient, we would have solved that already. It's not all of those things. It's a matter of you need those frontline workers who aren't skilled in the things that you are, but those people needed forever the folks like you that are skilled in technology and finance and administration and operations to have that same full moral obligation and appreciation around the tools and how we see them. And I think it's pretty cool that we're having this conversation because I haven't seen it before. So that's pretty awesome. And thank you for being a part of that.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
It's been absolutely incredible discussion and much needed.